My dad demanded I sell my home for my sister's $150,000 wedding, calling me a disgrace. He had no idea I'd secretly bought his company and came to the rehearsal dinner to serve him an eviction notice. The city of Chicago spread out beneath my window on the 45th floor, a breathtaking tapestry of steel, glass, and ambition. It was my landscape, my sanctuary. Inside the hushed, climate-controlled air of my office at Sterling Equity Group, the only sound was the quiet hum of my workstation and the distant, muted siren song of the streets below. I had just spent 2 hours methodically dismantling the overconfident arguments of a rival firm's legal team, securing a favorable acquisition of a mid-market logistics company. It was a clean, decisive victory, the kind that left a pleasant, low-frequency thrum of adrenaline in my veins. It was the feeling of control, of competence. A feeling I had spent my entire adult life chasing. That's when my personal phone, lying dormant and face down on the polished surface of my desk, began to vibrate. It didn't ring. I had disabled the ringer for this number years ago. A small act of self-preservation. But the pulsing light of the screen was unmistakable, illuminating a name that felt more like a brand than a person: Preston. My father. A call from him was a rare and unwelcome event, usually signaling a need, a demand, or a thinly veiled criticism. It was never a simple check-in, never a casual "how are you?" I watched the screen pulse, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. The call ended. A moment later, the screen lit up again with a text message. The words were stark, devoid of any warmth. "Call me now. It's about the wedding." Of course, it was. For the last 6 months, the wedding had ceased to be a simple event and had morphed into a sentient entity, a vortex of need that consumed all conversation, all energy, and, most importantly, all of my family's finances. It was the wedding of my younger sister, Serafina, the designated princess, to her equally manicured fiancé, Julian. I took a slow, deliberate breath, squaring my shoulders as if preparing for a hostile negotiation, and dialed. He picked up on the first ring, a power move. "I was beginning to think you'd ignore me," he began, foregoing a greeting. His voice was a low baritone, the sound of manufactured authority he used to command sales teams and intimidate his children. "I was in a meeting," I replied, my tone clipped and level. It was the voice I used with opposing counsel, the one that offered no emotional handholds. "What do you need, Dad?" "What I need," he stressed the word, "is for you to remember you have a family. I need you to listen. Your mother and I were just on the phone with the wedding planner. The final invoice for the floral arrangements came in. Apparently, Serafina's desire for a cascade of orchids is more expensive than we anticipated." I remained silent, picturing him in his study, a glass of scotch in one hand, a spreadsheet of his daughter's extravagant desires in the other. He only spoke of money in 2 ways, as a weapon to be wielded or as a burden to be lamented. "We're looking at a final figure of around $150,000, all in," he said. The number hung in the air, obscene and absurd. "Your mother is beside herself with worry. We're a little short." The admission was clipped, tasting like acid in his mouth. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, the words polite but empty. "I'm not calling for your sympathy, Maeve. I'm calling for a solution," he said, his tone hardening. "And I've found one. It's elegant, it's simple, and it's high time you did your part. You're going to sell your house." The silence that stretched between Chicago and the suburbs was so absolute I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. The request was so far beyond the realm of reason that for a moment, I was certain I was hallucinating, that the stress of the day had finally fractured my reality. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," he repeated, his voice laced with impatience. "Sell the house. You've been in it for 2 years, the market is up. The equity you pull out will be more than enough to cover the shortfall and ensure your sister has the perfect, flawless stay she deserves." A laugh, cold and sharp, escaped my lips before I could stop it. "Absolutely not. That is the most insane thing you have ever said to me. Don't you dare take that tone," he snapped, his voice rising. Let me be crystal clear with you. Do you remember who co-signed on that mortgage? Who put their own financial standing on the line so the bank would even look at you? Your mother and I did. We made that house possible. It wouldn't exist without us. Therefore, you owe us. You owe your sister a perfect wedding. You owe this family your contribution. Oh, you? I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The years of quiet resentment began to coalesce into a single, hard point of anger. I made every payment, on time, for 24 months. I paid the property taxes. I paid for the new roof after the hailstorm. My name, and my name alone, is on the deed of trust. You are a co-signer, a temporary measure. And my name is still on the loan documents, he roared, playing what he thought was his trump card. Which means I have a legal say in the matter. And I'm saying this is what's happening. This is for Serafina. Her fiancé is a Pemberton, for God's sake. This wedding is a reflection on all of us. It has to be perfect. Your sister's happiness, our family's reputation, it's all on the line. My home, my security, and my financial future are not for sale to fund a party, I stated, each word a block of granite. His voice dropped, the rage condensing into something colder, something more venomous. You are a selfish, ungrateful disgrace, Maeve. I always knew it. You sit up there in your glass tower, playing with your imaginary money, and you've forgotten what it means to be a daughter. I will find a way to make you do this. Don't you dare test me. The line went dead. I held the phone to my ear for a full 10 seconds, listening to the empty buzz of the dial tone. Slowly, I placed it back on the desk. My hand was perfectly steady, a stark contrast to the earthquake that had just torn through my carefully ordered world. He thought this was a negotiation about money. He had just declared a war over my entire existence. And it was a war he was going to lose. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'd love to give your city a shout out. That phone call was a key, unlocking a door I tried to keep permanently sealed. Behind it was a long, silent hallway I called my museum of pain. It wasn't a place of grand tragedies, but of 1,000 small, meticulously preserved cuts and papered over dismissals. As I stared out at the indifferent grid of the city, I found myself walking its halls once more, the ghosts of my past whispering from every exhibit. The first exhibit was brightly lit, deceptively cheerful. I'm 18, standing on the vast stage of my high school auditorium. It's graduation day. The air is a humid mix of parental pride, wilting roses, and teenage anxiety. I'm wearing a simple white dress under my gown, one I'd bought myself with money from my part-time library job. I'm the valedictorian. My speech, which I'd practiced for weeks until the words felt like my own skin, is clutched in a hand damp with nervous sweat. I step up to the podium, adjust the microphone, and my eyes immediately scan the 5th row, center section. I see the empty seats before my brain fully processes them. 2 vacant patches of worn, red velvet where my parents, Preston and Eleanor, were supposed to be. A cold wave of confusion washes over me, so strong I almost lose my place in my speech. I stumble through the words, the accolades and encouragements feeling like ash in my mouth. Later, at the chaotic reception in the gymnasium, my mother found me. She didn't hug me. She patted my arm, a gesture one might give to a distant acquaintance. Lovely speech, dear, she'd said, her eyes already scanning the crowd for the exit. Now, have you seen the car? Serafina has her prom hair appointment at 5, and you know how traffic gets. We can't keep the stylist waiting. The plaque in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My 4 years of academic excellence had been weighed against a hairdo, and had been found wanting. I drifted down the hall to the next display, this one under the cool, fluorescent lights of a memory from college. I'm 19, a sophomore. I'd worked my tail off to get into one of the best business schools in the country, patching together scholarships and working 2 jobs to cover what they didn't. One winter, my decade-old laptop, the one that had gotten me through high school, finally died. It happened during midterms week. Panicked, I called home. I didn't ask for a handout. I asked for a small loan, just a few $100s to be paid back with interest from my next paycheck. My father got on the phone. "Maeve, money doesn't grow on trees," he'd said, his voice thick with disappointment. "We're in a bit of a tight spot right now. Your sister's equestrian lessons are proving to be quite an investment, and she's showing real promise." I ended up taking on extra overnight shifts at the campus library, writing my papers by hand, my eyes burning with exhaustion. 2 weeks later, I saw a post on my mother's social media. It was a photo of Serafina, beaming, next to a brand new, beautiful chestnut horse. The caption read, "Anything for our champion. So proud of our dedicated equestrian." The cost of that horse could have bought a fleet of laptops. Further down, the largest exhibit came into view. The centerpiece of the museum. My house. I'm 26, sitting in the sterile, beige office of a mortgage broker. The air smells of stale coffee and anxiety. I was a nervous wreck, but also vibrating with a terrifying excitement. I had done it. I had saved an astonishingly large down payment, a sum that represented years of skipped vacations, packed lunches, and a monastic social life. My credit was perfect, my income solid, but because of my age, the bank suggested a cosigner would secure a better interest rate. It was a formality. A box to be ticked. But for my father, it was a stage. He sighed dramatically as he picked up the pen to sign the loan documents, a performance for the benefit of the broker. "The things we do for our children," he'd said, shaking his head with the air of a man shouldering a great and terrible burden. "It's a significant risk, in this market. But family is family." He made it sound as though he were personally financing the entire endeavor. He made me feel small, reckless, and indebted. The broker just smiled politely, but I burned with a quiet, helpless shame. My greatest achievement had been reframed as his magnanimous act of charity. This house wasn't just my address. It was my vindication. Every perfectly aligned hardwood plank, every coat of paint I'd applied myself, every bill I paid on time was a testament to my own capability. It was the one place on earth where my value wasn't up for debate. It was my sanctuary, my fortress, my proof that I could not only survive, but thrive, without their validation. And now, he wanted to burn it all down to light the candles on Serafina's wedding cake. Staring out at the city, I felt the sorrow that had wallpapered the halls of my museum begin to peel away. Underneath was not plaster and drywall, but solid steel. The exhibits were no longer just monuments to my pain. They were becoming blueprints for my counteroffensive. The quiet, invisible daughter was dead. In her place, a strategist was being born. My fingers felt like ice as I scrolled through my contacts and pressed the one name that felt like an anchor in a swirling sea, Donovan. My uncle. Preston's younger brother, and in many ways, his complete opposite. Where my father was loud, Donovan was thoughtful. Where my father saw life as a series of power plays, Donovan saw it as a ledger that needed to be balanced. He was a partner at a respected accounting firm, a man who found comfort in the clean, irrefutable logic of numbers. "Talk to me," he answered, his voice a familiar, steady presence. I didn't preamble. I launched directly into the story, the words spilling out of me in a torrent of disbelief and cold anger. I told him about the demand, the justification, the threat. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. It wasn't the silence of judgment, but of absorption. "Well, kid," he finally said, a deep sigh rustling through the phone. "I'd say I'm shocked, but that would be a lie. I am, however, impressed. This is a new level of narcissistic delusion, even for him." "He's serious, Donovan," I said. "He thinks he has a legal right to force my hand." "He has a legal right to be a nuisance, that's about it," Donovan corrected. "But he's counting on emotional leverage, not legal. He's counting on you being the same girl who used to shrink when he raised his voice." He doesn't realize that girl isn't home anymore. He paused. You have to understand what's really driving this, Maeve. It's not about the money itself. It's about what the money buys. Status, I said, the bitter word already on my tongue. Exactly. Status. The fiancé, Julian Pemberton, his family is old money. They're the people Preston has been trying to impress his entire adult life. They're on the board at the country club he just got into. They summer where he wishes he could. This wedding isn't a family event for your father, it's a corporate merger. He's merging the House of Preston with a blue-chip stock, and Serafina is the asset being traded. He sees this as his masterpiece, his crowning achievement. Your house is just collateral damage. It's the cost of doing business. Hearing it laid out so clinically, so brutally, was both horrifying and clarifying. My pain, my security, my future, they weren't even factors in his calculation. I was an unfortunate expense on his path to glory. He's a fool, I whispered, the words filled with a newfound contempt. He's a desperate man, Donovan said, his voice dropping slightly. And that's where the real story is. The delicious, pathetic irony of it all. While he's trying to put on this ludicrous performance of wealth, his own stage is collapsing from under him. My focus sharpened. What are you talking about? His job? His company, Donovan confirmed. Apex Industrial. I handled the accounting for one of their biggest suppliers, so I hear the whispers. The place is a ghost ship, Maeve. It's been run into the ground by years of mismanagement and a complete failure to innovate. They're leveraged to the hilt, bleeding cash every quarter. They've been quietly shopping for a buyer, anyone to take them over, but the books are so ugly no one's biting. The scuttlebutt is that if they can't secure a buyout in the next 6 months, they're looking at a Chapter 11 filing. Bankruptcy. My mind, my greatest weapon, started to connect the dots with terrifying speed. Apex Industrial. A distressed asset. Undervalued. Desperate for a buyer. A company whose inner workings I knew something about, thanks to years of hearing my father complain at the dinner table. An analyst's dream. A plan, audacious and chillingly precise, began to materialize from the fog of my anger. It was a strategy so perfectly symmetrical, so poetically just, that it felt like it had been handed to me by fate itself. My breathing evened out. The emotional storm receded, replaced by the calm, cold focus of a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. Donovan, I said, my voice transformed. It was no longer the voice of the wounded daughter. It was the voice I used in the boardroom. I need you to tell me everything you know about Apex Industrial's debt structure and their board of directors. Every single detail. The days that followed Preston's ultimatum were a masterclass in emotional extortion. Having deployed his heavy artillery to no effect, he fell back, initiating a scorched earth campaign of guilt and manipulation, with my mother, Eleanor, as his lead field marshal. She called on a Tuesday morning, her timing impeccable, just as I was heading into a critical meeting. Her voice was already wavering, pitched to the perfect frequency of maternal distress. Maeve, darling, she began, the endearment feeling slick and false. I was just on the phone with your sister. She was in tears. Absolute hysterics. She's so worried that the Pembertons will think, well, that we're not up to their standards. She feels like her dream is slipping away. Sarah's dream is her responsibility, Mom. Not mine, I replied, keeping my voice even as I organized my presentation notes. How can you be so cold? Eleanor's voice cracked, right on cue. This isn't about you, Maeve. This is about family. About supporting your sister. This house, it's just a thing. It's wood and paint. Are you really telling me that your things are more important than your sister's happiness? Than the unity of this family? It was a brilliant performance. She framed my self-preservation as selfishness, my financial independence as a moral failing. For years, this tactic had worked flawlessly. The fear of being the difficult daughter, the one who tore the family apart, had been my cage. But I had the key now. My things, as you call them, represent my life's work and my security, I said, my voice devoid of the anger she was trying to provoke. And yes, they are more important to me than a party. The conversation about my house is over. But it's not, she insisted, her voice rising. Your father, he's so hurt. He feels like you've completely disrespected him. He gave you everything. He did not give me everything, I said, the words coming out colder than I intended. I earned everything. And I'm not setting it on fire to keep Serafina warm. I have to go. I ended the call before she could launch into another round of sobs. But that was just the opening salvo. The next day, an email arrived. It was from my Aunt Carol, Eleanor's sister. The subject line was simply, disappointment. The email was a long, sanctimonious screed about the duties of a daughter, the importance of sacrifice, and the evils of selfishness. Your mother is a nervous wreck, and your father is carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, she wrote. And all you can think about is yourself. I remember when you were a little girl, you were so sweet. I don't know what happened to you, but I pray you find your way back to the family before it's too late. Then came the texts from cousins I barely knew, and even a call from an old family friend, all carrying the same tune, orchestrated by the same conductor. They were Preston's flying monkeys, sent to peck away at my resolve. But something fundamental had shifted within me. Their words, once capable of inflicting deep wounds, now felt like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. Each manipulative phrase, each guilt-laden accusation, didn't weaken me. It did the opposite. It fueled the cold, clean fire of my resolve. It was validation. It proved to me that their concept of family was not a network of mutual support, but a one-way street of obligation, flowing directly from me to them. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't delete their emails. I saved them. I created a new folder on my computer, labeled Justification. Every tearful voicemail, every judgmental text, I archived it. They were building my case for me. They were sharpening the blade I would soon be forced to use, all while telling me how cruel I was for simply holding it. They had no idea that I wasn't just defending. I was preparing to attack. Back at Sterling Equity Group, my personal life was sealed away in a locked compartment. Here, I was not a daughter or a sister. I was a predator. My arena was the world of distressed assets, and Apex Industrial was the wounded gazelle I had been waiting for my entire career. I assembled my A-team, two brilliant, hungry analysts named Ben and Chloe, a cruel irony with my sister's name, who thrived on complex, high-stakes deals. They knew nothing of my personal connection. To them, Apex was simply Project Chimera, a target with a monstrously ugly exterior and a heart of gold. For 2 weeks, we lived in a state of controlled chaos. Our conference room became a war room, the glass walls covered in flowcharts, financial projections, and competitor analyses. We subsisted on stale coffee and takeout, fueled by the intoxicating scent of a killer deal. The deeper we dug, the more beautiful the opportunity became. They're a mess, Maeve, Ben said, pointing to a spreadsheet projected on the main screen. Their debt is a tangle of high-interest loans, their supply chain is inefficient, and their R&D budget has been zero for 5 years. But their core patents are still valuable, and their client list, while shrinking, is still legacy solid. But look at this, Chloe added, highlighting a different file. The real estate. It's insane. They've been carrying these properties on their books at their 1980s purchase prices. Adjusted for inflation and current market value, the land their main factory sits on is worth more than the company's entire market capitalization. It's a real estate play disguised as a failing industrial firm. This was my world. This was the language I spoke fluently. While my father saw a sales chart, I saw a balance sheet. While he saw a company, I saw a collection of assets waiting to be liberated. The day of the pitch to the fund's managing partners arrived. The room was intimidating, a circle of silver-haired men who had built empires and crushed competitors before I was born. They were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. My blood, if I failed. I stood before them, cool and composed. My presentation was a symphony of data, a story told in numbers. I laid out the terminal decline of Apex's core business. I showcased the gross mismanagement. And then, I revealed the hidden value, the real estate portfolio, the undervalued patents. Apex Industrial is a dying company, I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the silent room. But it is a very, very valuable corpse. We're not buying a business, we're executing a strategic liquidation. We acquire the company for pennies on the dollar, sell off the prime real estate to developers who are desperate for that land, service the debt with the proceeds, and what's left, a smaller, leaner manufacturing core and a portfolio of valuable patents, is pure profit. Mr. Abernathy, the fund's most formidable partner, leaned forward, peering at me over his spectacles. It's a bold move, Maeve. A vulture play. Why hasn't one of our competitors snatched it up? Because, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, they made a critical error. They tried to value it as a going concern. They saw a sick patient and thought about how to cure it. We're not doctors. We're coroners. We're here to expertly dissect the body and sell the valuable organs. The sickness is what makes it cheap enough to be profitable for us. I fielded their questions for an hour. They grilled me on risk assessment, on market volatility, on legal exposure. With every answer, I felt my power growing. This was my territory. My father had called me a disgrace for not liquidating my life for his vanity. Here, in this room, I was being celebrated for my ability to see how to liquidate a company for profit. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Finally, Abernathy leaned back. He exchanged a look with the other partners. A series of slow, almost imperceptible nods went around the table. All right, Maeve, he said, a rare glimmer of approval in his eyes. You've made your case. It's a solid thesis. Draw up the official offer. The capital is approved. Go get your company. I nodded, my face impassive, but inside, a cold, triumphant fire was blazing. Go get your company. He had no idea how right he was. The machinery of a hostile takeover is a thing of silent, brutal beauty. Lawyers trade calls in hushed tones. Documents, thick as encyclopedias, are exchanged via secure servers. Money, vast and invisible, is marshaled and prepared for deployment. The offer for Apex Industrial was submitted through a specially created subsidiary, Northwood Capital Partners. The name was deliberately chosen for its bland, unthreatening quality. It sounded like a sleepy, conservative firm, not a shark circling a bleeding target. To the aging, desperate board of Apex, our offer was a miracle. They saw it as a rescue, a chance to salvage some value for their shareholders before the entire enterprise collapsed. They didn't scrutinize the buyer too closely, they were too relieved to have one at all. They accepted our terms with almost indecent haste. During this period, I existed in a state of suspended animation. My family had fallen silent, interpreting my lack of communication as a sign that their pressure campaign was working, that I was wrestling with my conscience. They had no idea I was wrestling with leveraged buyout models and employment contracts. A few days before the deal was scheduled to close, I was in a late-night conference call with Ms. Davies, my lead counsel. She was a legend in corporate law, a woman with a mind like a steel trap and zero tolerance for inefficiency. We were performing the final review of the asset transfer, a meticulous process of dotting I's and crossing T's. The deal is clean, Maeve, she said, her voice crisp and clear through the speakerphone. Their financials are even worse than we projected, which only improves our position. The real estate deeds are all in order. We have the plants, the warehouses, and, just a moment, there's the executive housing portfolio. I sat up straighter, my pen pausing over a document. This was the part one was waiting for. It's a small portfolio, she continued, 4 properties in total. A holdover from a different era of corporate compensation. 3 are currently vacant. 1 has a residency agreement tied to a senior director's employment contract. A Mr. Preston. She paused. Same last name as you. Any relation? He's my father, I said, my voice flat. There was a moment of silence on the line. Ms. Davies was far too professional to comment, but I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. I see, she said, her tone unchanged. Well, as you know, this kind of benefit is standardly contingent upon continued employment. Should the director's position be terminated during a restructuring, the residency agreement would be nullified. The company would, of course, be within its rights to reclaim the property after a standard notice period. She was simply stating a legal fact. She was a lawyer, interpreting a contract. But her words landed in my mind with the force of a revelation. The plan had always been to take control of his professional life as a countermove to his invasion of my personal life. It was about power, about turning the tables. But this was something more. This was not just strategy, it was poetic justice. It was a perfect, symmetrical, devastating checkmate he never saw coming. He had tried to use his name on my loan to make me homeless. He had unknowingly given me the power to use his name on his employment contract to do the same to him. A slow, cold smile spread across my face in the dim light of my office. It was the smile of a predator that has just been handed a weapon it didn't even know it needed. It was the smile of someone who was about to burn down the whole system using the enemy's own rulebook. Ms. Davies, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Please begin drafting the necessary paperwork for the termination of that specific housing agreement. Have it ready to be executed upon the official change of management. And please, be meticulous. Of course, Maeve, she replied, a new note of profound respect in her voice. Consider it done. The board was set. The pieces were in place. And my father was walking blindly toward a trap of his own making. The day the ink dried on the acquisition, the world didn't change. It was a Tuesday. The stock market ticked along. People went to work. My father drove his company car to his office at Apex Industrial, sat at his company-owned desk, and complained about his company's declining sales, completely unaware that he was now, for all intents and purposes, my employee. The power had shifted in absolute silence. I waited. I let him marinate in his perceived victory for 2 full days. I knew he would be gloating to my mother, telling her how he had finally put his difficult, ungrateful daughter in her place. I needed him to be at the peak of his arrogance. On Thursday evening, he called. The smug satisfaction in his voice was so thick I could almost feel it through the phone. Maeve, he began, not as a question, but as a summons. I'm calling to confirm your attendance. And your compliance. I'm not sure what you mean, I said, my voice a carefully constructed canvas of innocence. He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Don't play games. I know you've had time to think. I know you've come to your senses. The family is counting on you. The family. He used the word like a shield, a justification for any act of cruelty. The rehearsal dinner for Serafina and Julian is this Saturday night, he continued, dictating the terms of my surrender. 8 o'clock sharp, at the Oak Room. It will be an intimate affair, just the core family and, of course, the Pembertons. It's critical that we present a united front. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I expect you to be there. And I expect you to bring the signed, notarized listing agreement for your house. No more discussion. No more debate. This is your final chance to be a part of this family, Maeve. If you don't show up, or if you show up with excuses instead of that agreement, then you and I are done. Don't ever call me Dad again. A profound, exhilarating calm washed over me. It was the feeling a strategist gets when their opponent not only falls into the trap but builds the trap for them, baits it, and then invites them to spring it. He had just handed me the stage, the audience, and the perfect, dramatic moment for the curtain to fall. "Don't worry," I said, my voice soft and steady. "I'll be there." "Good," he grunted, the sound of a man thoroughly convinced of his own power. He was about to hang up. "Dad?" I said, stopping him. "What is it now?" he asked, his voice sharp with impatience. "I just wanted to confirm," I said, letting a sliver of ice enter my tone. "I will be bringing paperwork. The paperwork that will settle all our outstanding business. Once and for all." He hung up, too blinded by his own triumph to hear the warning in my words. I leaned back in my chair in my silent office, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. The Oak Room. The most exclusive, ostentatious restaurant in the suburbs. A temple of my father's aspirations. It was the perfect stage for his public humiliation. The perfect place to foreclose on a patriarch. The Oak Room was a cliché of suburban wealth. The walls were paneled in wood so dark it seemed to absorb the light. The air was thick with the scent of money, a heady mix of expensive perfume, aged leather, and prime-grade beef. Hushed conversations and the discreet clinking of heavy silverware formed the soundtrack of my father's ambitions. At a long table in a private dining room, the two families were already seated. The House of Preston and the House of Pemberton, united in their shared celebration of my sister's social ascension. Through the glass doors, I could see my father, Preston, holding court at the head of the table. He was in his element, laughing a little too loudly, a glass of red wine held aloft as he told some anecdote that had Mr. Pemberton smiling politely. Serafina, seated beside her fiancé Julian, looked radiant, a princess in her silk dress, basking in the glow of being the undisputed center of attention. My mother, Eleanor, watched them all with a look of anxious pride. I took a deep breath, the cold, conditioned air filling my lungs. Beside me, Miss Davies stood poised and silent, her expression unreadable. She was not my lawyer tonight, she was my associate. Her presence was a clear signal that this was not a family squabble. This was a corporate action. We walked in. The change in the room's atmosphere was instantaneous and profound. The laughter faltered, conversations trailed off. It was as if a cold front had just swept through the room. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Serafina's smile curdled into a sneer. Eleanor's face tightened with anxiety. Julian and his parents looked on with polite confusion. My father saw me, and a slow, triumphant smirk spread across his lips. He saw my tailored suit and my composed demeanor not as a sign of strength, but as the formal attire of surrender. And he saw Ms. Davies' briefcase as the carrier of his prize. He chose to make an example of me. "Maeve," he boomed, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He raised his glass. "So glad you could make it. I was just telling the Pembertons about the importance of family loyalty. It seems my words had an effect. I see you've come prepared to finally do the right thing." He gestured magnanimously towards me, a king accepting tribute from a rebellious province. I walked the length of the room, my heels clicking softly on the marble floor. I didn't go to my designated seat at the far end of the table, the seat of the afterthought. I walked directly to the head of the table until I stood opposite my father. The polished wood between us felt like a chessboard. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "I've come to settle our family business." I placed my own briefcase on an empty chair, clicked it open, and pulled out a single, leather-bound portfolio. I placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud that seemed to echo in the silent room. He reached for it, his eyes gleaming with victory. He expected to see a multi-page real estate contract. His confident expression began to crumble as he read the cover sheet of the first document. His face went slack. The healthy, ruddy color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, gray pallor. His hand, the one holding the paper, began to shake. What is this?" he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. The whole table leaned in, straining to hear. That, I announced, my voice steady and measured, is a copy of the official press release that will be distributed to all major financial news outlets at 9 a.m. on Monday. It details the successful acquisition of a controlling interest in Apex Industrial by Northwood Capital Partners, a subsidiary of Sterling Equity Group, the firm where I am a senior analyst. A ripple of confused murmurs went through the room. Mr. Pemberton, a man who understood the language of business, suddenly looked at me with a new, sharp interest. I reached into the portfolio and placed a second document on top of the first. This, I continued, is an internal corporate memo, effective immediately. It outlines a complete restructuring of the senior management team at Apex Industrial, designed to improve efficiency and shareholder value. Your position, Regional Sales Director, has unfortunately been deemed redundant. Eleanor let out a small, strangled gasp. Serafina stared, her mouth half open, the words not yet registering. Preston looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with a dawning, animal terror. You can't, you work for them, you don't. I led the acquisition team, I clarified, cutting him off. It was my deal. I paused, letting the full weight of that statement land. Then, I reached in and took out the third and final document. It was a single sheet of paper, printed on crisp, official letterhead. I didn't place it on the pile. I slid it across the polished table, a silent messenger of doom, until it came to a stop directly in front of his wine glass. And this, I said, my eyes locking with his, refusing to let him look away, is a legal notice regarding the property at 124 Chestnut Lane. As the house is a corporate asset, and as your employment has been terminated, the residency agreement is now void. This is a formal notice requiring you to vacate the premises within 60 days. It is, in legal terms, an eviction notice. The room was now so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only the people closest could hear, but the venom in it was for him alone. You demanded I sell my house for this wedding. Instead, I bought your company, I took your job, and now, I'm taking your house. I straightened up. The deed was done. The king was in checkmate. The invisible daughter, the family disgrace, the selfish child, had just foreclosed on the patriarch. The silence that followed my declaration was not a peaceful one. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a submarine's hull just before it implodes. It was the silence of a world being unmade. Preston stared at the eviction notice, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief. The powerful, blustering man was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell, his skin gray and slack. Then, the hull breached. The first sound was a choked sob from my mother. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a horror that was, for the first time, not directed at my supposed disobedience, but at the stark, brutal consequences of her husband's hubris. Her hand fluttered to her chest as if to calm a heart that had just been told to stop beating. But it was Serafina who truly shattered the quiet. A sound ripped from her throat, a high, piercing shriek that was part rage and part grief. "You monster," she screamed, her carefully constructed princess facade shattering into a million pieces. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "You ruined it. You ruined everything." Tears carved black mascara tracks down her pale cheeks. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. "My wedding. My perfect day. You couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand to see me happy, to see me have something you never would. You've always been a jealous, bitter shrew." Her fiancé, Julian, a man whose entire existence seemed dedicated to avoiding unpleasantness, looked horrified. He glanced from his screaming fiancé to my shell-shocked father, and then to his own parents. Mr. Pemberton's face was an unreadable mask of cold displeasure. In that single, fleeting moment, Julian was no longer looking at his future bride, he was looking at a bad investment, a social liability. He took a half-step back, a small, almost imperceptible retreat that screamed volumes. The Pembertons, masters of navigating social disasters, were already in motion. Mrs. Pemberton rose with the fluid grace of a swan, placing a cool hand on her husband's arm. "Preston, Eleanor," she said, her voice a whip of chilled silk. "It seems you have a pressing family matter to attend to. Perhaps we should postpone this celebration." It was not a suggestion, it was a verdict. They turned and made their exit, a quiet, orderly retreat from a contagion. They didn't offer a single word of comfort or solidarity. The alliance was dead. My own relatives, the chorus of flying monkeys who had so eagerly pecked at my resolve, were now utterly silent. They stared intently at their bread rolls, their wine glasses, anywhere but at me or at the head of the table. Their loyalty had been to power, and the seat of power had just changed in a way they couldn't comprehend. My father finally lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw the roiling chaos of a man whose entire identity had been stripped away in less than 5 minutes. There was hatred, yes, but beneath it was a raw, terrifying fear. "Why?" he rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. It was the question of a man who genuinely could not understand how the world had stopped revolving around him. I gave him no answer. I had not come for a cathartic confrontation. I had not come to explain my pain. I had come to deliver a statement of fact. My purpose was served. With a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Ms. Davies, I turned my back on the wreckage. I walked away from the shattered plates of their expectations, from the ruins of my sister's fantasy, from the ghost of the man who was my father. As we walked down the long, wood-paneled hall, Serafina's hysterical sobs echoed behind us. But the sound was muffled, distant. It was the sound of a storm I was finally leaving behind, a storm I would never have to weather again. The week following the rehearsal dinner was a symphony of chaos, conducted from a distance. My phone was a constant barrage of frantic, pleading voicemails from my mother and long, rambling, abusive text messages from Serafina. I didn't listen to them. I didn't read them. I simply let them accumulate, a digital monument to their disbelief. Finally, a week to the day, an email arrived that I did open. It was from Eleanor. The tone was different. The hysteria was gone, replaced by the flat, exhausted prose of defeat. It was a rambling, incoherent letter, part apology, part accusation, but it ended with a single, desperate question: what are we supposed to do now? I didn't reply to her directly. A family problem had become a business matter, and it required a business solution. I forwarded the email to Ms. Davies with a simple, 2-word instruction: draft a response. The document she sent back for my approval was a masterpiece of cold, corporate precision. It was an official letter from Northwood Capital Partners. It outlined, in clear and unambiguous terms, a severance package for Preston. It was a standard package, calculated according to his years of service, not generous, but not punitive. It was fair, which I knew would feel like the cruelest insult of all to them. The letter also formally extended the move-out date for the house from 60 to 90 days, as a gesture of goodwill during this transition. It was a calculated act of professionalism, a final, clear statement that their emotional appeals held no currency here. The terms were non-negotiable. That night, I was home. My home. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the noise of the preceding weeks. I found myself wandering into the spare room, where a few unpacked boxes from my last move still sat. On a whim, I opened one. It was filled with old photo albums. I lifted the top one, the cheap plastic cover crackling. I flipped through the pages, past awkward school photos and blurry birthday parties. And then I found it. A small, square photograph, faded with age. In it, I am about 5 years old, perched high on my father's shoulders. We are at a county fair, and behind us, the lights of a Ferris wheel blur into a kaleidoscope of color. We are both laughing, a genuine, unburdened, uncomplicated laugh. His face, younger and softer, is tilted up towards mine, full of a pride and affection I hadn't seen in decades. It was taken before Serafina was born. Before the world was split into a kingdom for her and an outpost for me. I traced the faded outline of his smile with my fingertip. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I felt tears well in my eyes. Not tears of anger or even triumph. Tears of grief. I was mourning. I was mourning the father in that photograph, the man he might have been. I was mourning the relationship we lost, the one that was sacrificed on the altar of my sister's ego and his own insecurities. I closed the album. I realized then that the true victory wasn't the company. It wasn't the job, or even the house. It was this moment. This quiet, painful, liberating moment of acceptance. The desperate, little girl need for his approval, a need that had haunted me my entire life, was finally gone. I hadn't destroyed my family, I had simply survived it. I had walked out of the burning building of their expectations and into my own clean, quiet, and peaceful life. I stood up and walked to my living room window, looking out at the quiet, tree-lined street. My home was safe. My future was my own. The silence was no longer lonely, it was the sound of sovereignty. The sound of freedom. Am I wrong for using the language my father understands best, power and money, to finally make him listen? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that button so you don't miss out on more stories of drama and justice served. Share your thoughts on Maeve's actions in the comments below.